YouTube.
Yep.
Don't hit the play. If you do that, you're gonna have a terrible echo.
Okay.
So just
Okay.
minimize the browser, leave it up, minimize the browser, and stay
Okay.
on.
And then to cancel, close out of YouTube, I'm just going to,
You're gonna actually go into the account and sign out. Well, I may be able to do that myself tomorrow at home. See, what you would do at the end is go here. So what we don't want to do is hit play. That's a mistake.
I see.
You can go into here and go sign out.
I see. Okay. Okay.
So we should be able to now just minimize this. Got it.
Okay.
And now we're back. So
Okay. So we only
what I
have
will do,
you, Mike,
now
and
your camera's not on, is that right? Do you have a camera? Doesn't matter, let's do without a camera. And what I'm gonna do is go into YouTube.
There you go.
There you go, see if it's actually streaming,
okay.
which it should be by now.
It's live streaming, guys. This is Mike.
Okay,
We
Can you
good?
hear me?
it's streaming, yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
You guys hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, good, we're streaming.
Okay.
Now, the other things, we're gonna look at the volume here. So that's on here.
You guys hear me?
Now we can,
Yes, we can. We can hear you.
all right, good, we're streaming. So you're good. Now, the other thing, we're gonna look at now the volume here. We have to echo, that's on here. We have to, someone is getting it. Now we can, yes, we can. We're getting it. All right, good. Now, we're getting echo. How do you turn your volume on? We have to echo, that's on here. We have to, someone is getting it. Not, that's the,
Sure. You.
well, temporarily, but you can't mute that because otherwise it won't be how John.
Here's fine.
You find it, how do you turn your volume on? Turn that way down. So that's your computer and it's coming through the YouTube. Right, that's where the echo all the way down. And then here, go into there, audio settings. Put the up,
Here.
yep, the up, audio settings. And we want to turn that up and that all the way up. I always bring a mouse. You just click over here, we'll come over.
Mike, get my stuff on the sheet, is that helpful? Are we gonna be able to print them out or?
There you go.
There's a lot of materials there, that would be awesome.
There you go. Keep dragging.
Oh, come on. You gotta be kidding me.
Okay.
You just put it on the line over here and tap. Push down. Does not work.
What if you say automatically? It won't do it automatically?
It should, yeah. It should go up. All right, that's automatic. So turn that off. And now so you can drag it. There you go.
All the way.
Well, it's right there, and I will put out the all the way up, but all the way up. So now I'm going to turn the volume up. Here's the volume for the system. Okay.
Okay.
So close that out. Let's see if we can get Mike Curry to talk to us. Hey, Mike, can you hear us? Mike Curry.
Yes, I can. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Mike, can you
Yes.
see? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Not this mic, different mic.
Too many mics. Say something, Mike.
You can hear us? Can you say something?
Yeah, I'm saying something, but you can't hear me.
We can't hear you, but you can hear us okay?
Yes.
All right. I'm not sure why it's doing that, but I know. It's because it doesn't work out. That's true. I put a stop on that. Now let's turn your volume up. So, all right, say something again, Mike.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Good.
Okay, so what we have to do is somehow not get the YouTube under the play. That gives, because it's like a 6-second delay. That's when we get terrible echo.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
Too much.
You're welcome. I wish I could remember all the things you said.
There'll be a quiz tomorrow.
I know. I know.
View settings, just check this, all the way, let's go all the way up there. And he can hear us okay, so.
Yeah, I think we're good. Okay.
I think we're good.
So now we just need Don.
Thanks.
So we need John to come.
Yep.
Okay. Yes.
And, yeah, where's he at?
He's not here yet. Hope he gets here soon.
Yeah,
Okay. So we good? Don?
yeah, I'm gonna stick around to hopefully John comes. No, we can just, if we have to, no, yeah, he's gonna, if not, he'll go through Zoom, but he'll be here.
We had a couple of churches out. We were supposed to have last time.
So let me look at that and we'll run that through,
This is the, For the first time, there's
I finally remembered to right click and just send you the link.
I think we got it, yeah.
Okay.
I'm looking for a stone. Barb was not feeling for it this morning, even though she could walk, we did 10-mile bike rides last week,
Yeah,
but she has a cardiac history.
I know.
So she said, we're gonna go do that. So she's actually in the hospital. Everything's tested fine, but our doctor wants to monitor.
Of course.
So I came just to get this going.
So she's been admitted.
Yeah.
See you.
How you doing, Bruce? Good. Barely.
I'm gonna save this on your desktop.
No.
I'm gonna show it here.
You know,
There's no sun.
oh, what's this? You know, it's a little like a vacation thing.
Oh, it was windy though, and nice.
Yeah.
I was
Like, it was spectacular. It was really spectacular.
Yeah, I'm eager to hear.
And actually, I thought it was.
Wow.
Well,
And you started a volcano. That's in Kilauea.
Don't see that because went to Sicily and Etna erupted, went to Hawaii and Kilauea erupted again a month later. So.
Okay, let me show you some. Okay. This is the introductory one that Bruce or Mike will do. And to open it, we have to browse to desktop, and there it is.
Upcoming events.
All right, so that's open.
That's Mike's or this?
That's mine. That's what Mike can do. Yeah.
Oh, this is the slide you were talking about.
Yep. So it's the couple of events, and then this is all stuff from the history
Okay,
of CCAS. That this is the 30th anniversary today, John.
yeah.
So it's like not that's the slides. That'll be fun. So then we'll put you want to put you in here now? We'll get on the desktop.
Should we do it? Yeah, I mean, did you bring it in this way or do you want me to
No,
do it?
your USB. I didn't get a chance to download it. Yeah, it's been a hectic day
I bet.
because we got the ER like 12:30, and it's like
12:30 PM?
yeah, it's just like half an hour ago that she got her room, and I just came right here to get Bruce going. It's right there somewhere. Okay. Like, she got her room, and I got. So, now let's try to open, browse. Not seeing your, not seeing,
Yeah, where's
it should be here.
Is there probably want to look under?
Is there another USB port?
No. Mine on your,
Go to back.
Did you click desktop?
try that, I think I used that one.
Yeah.
So this is you, right?
So, over there?
There you go.
The top,
He's got jokes and everything prepared.
Okay,
No ground.
Yeah. Let's start a lot of. That's because I'm gonna be.
Sorry.
No.
Respectful stuff.
Okay, so there you are. So click on enable content.
Like a general.
So they're both up there now.
Yeah,
Okay, yours and.
And we don't like them do. So,
okay.
okay, so then it's just gonna be, and it's,
Now, if there's, on this, we'll play through.
I don't know what it's
it will, we have to select that when we load it. We haven't seen that, let's, so how does that?
On one side, frequently I have to turn it on, and off, and I have to
So
back
let's
out.
just go to the slideshow, from the beginning, and what to do. When we do this, we have to always,
Yeah, good, I prefer that.
okay,
That's a pain in the neck.
the audio should work. I'm not sure, let me,
Let's go. Just do a right click and see.
let me get mics up, so it'll work too. Also, beginning, and we'll get it to hide the, presenter view. Because it screws zoom up. You have presenter view on. It's probably one of the settings down here, so should we leave that up for mics and he's ready to go?
So you think that was.
Let's go down. So we should go here to that one, and this launch from the beginning. I can stay and do this if Mike doesn't want
So
to.
probably.
I'm just trying to figure out how to get, on the audio. One thing you have to always do is you have to hide the presenter view,
Yes.
and there should be something about audio somewhere. I don't see it.
Just do a right click.
I was hoping like Jennifer from Greenwood.
It should work, I think.
She's like something. That she talked to an intro. When I really had.
I don't see anything there. Wait a minute.
Let's hope we have it.
Yeah, over up here, let's see, media. Oh, and subtitles.
He must have some audio.
Alt U and Alt J. Let me see. Alt U.
I didn't realize it was only.
Let's see.
Well, I have.
Like I said, we'll have to do my slides if Mike wants me to, then I'll delete.
That's what you said. Paul.
Is that okay? All right.
I just wanted to make sure it's on your dates. They would keep up something that changed. So they would, I was like,
Good.
do it. I don't have any announcements.
Okay, all right, good.
And, you know, he can do his thing, then it'll work out well.
Okay. It's coming through, I hear it.
Let me just see.
I've got.
Is there a slide that you know has audio? Will you try that out?
I've got 2,800. I've got 2,800. Total 2,800. How are you doing? Good.
Yeah, it's just. It's all right. That's all right. I don't mind closing the whole thing. We can open the
Let's put Mike back up there.
All right.
Just do it here. Just look in the other window. Shortcut. Okay.
And I ended up.
In person.
Beginning. And then high presenter.
And I.
So Dan's not here tonight. I
So he was sick also. He got sick on an airplane.
I see, on an airplane.
Oh,
Wow.
Or he was in the airport and had to talk to police officer because he was notifying him that him and his just died. So I didn't get the story because I was in a rush and he was back with her sick.
Oh, yeah.
He's had this like hit upper respiratory thing. So you have an off.
Good job, our best.
Yeah, take it easy, Bob. You okay?
I'm good.
Whenever
Whenever you're done, I know how to talk over the mics. Okay.
I think Mike Manning will do that. So I mean,
So,
just introduce.
I don't think anybody, there's no mic. I know very few people. So that, I see, Roger, I've never seen him. I know Pete. Oh, is that Mike talking to Dennis? Okay, I've seen Mike's name, and he sent me a very nice note years ago, but I haven't seen the group since 2019. So the guy in Rich, Steve.
She's
What's his name? How about behind?
just start, just give it.
Nick, Mike Newby.
Okay, you got it. And these are all students. So,
Good.
yeah, I think we're good.
How you doing? Good, how are you doing?
We're good. Very good.
Keeping us in a good time? Oh, yeah.
As usual.
You have to feel it.
Right.
The only way to get it.
Vegetables to cook? No.
I've given it, I gave this one
Good to see you.
I'm giving it in 10 days. I'm giving it in 22 days. I'm giving it. Okay.
So we really have to come down. Was the first one or are you going to?
This second one, I talked to Chesmont in June, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And I've gotten into the senior center group like you guys have.
yeah,
I hadn't done them before last year, but I'm having a pretty good time.
it's a fun time.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, you got a bunch of, peers that are educated, and have time on their hands.
Like rapper.
Yeah.
And some of them are like really bright. You know, they're like, oh, okay, that's a deep cut.
Yeah.
Yeah. Follow, Jeff.
All right.
Great.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah. And John is.
Just doing another. But anyway. Thinking about the-
Everybody.
Mike, John?
Good to see you. Sisters? Going, I'm trying to find a better. I got a clicker if you want to use it, but I can't get my, can't figure out a place to plug this in.
Well, before we get into.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Mattingly. I'm the observing chair for the club. I took over for
Don is sneaking out the door right now. He's did a great job for, I don't know how many years.
Oh.
Probably had it for like 6 months or something, but I'm the person primarily responsible for setting all of our observing events, both as a club and out in the community. So between now and next month, we have a few activities coming up, starting with this Friday night. We generally have a monthly observing session for club members at the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance, and it'll be there this Friday night. Now, I'm not sure how many of our people are going to be there because there's a York County Star Party going on at the same time, and we know a few of them are certainly going to be, but I will be there for sure on Friday night. You want to learn real astronomy? Find somebody else. Just like my role as the observing chair, I've only been at this for about a year or so. So I'm still learning how to use my telescope. But anyway, so that's this Friday. Dusk or sundown is like 7 o'clock. So I'll be there around 6:30 to open up the gate and help people get set up with their equipment, etc. Next Friday night, Star Farm Park. If you're familiar, I guess it's West Bradford. Step level from here, if you get onto 322 bypass till it ends and you make a right, headed out towards Downingtown, about a mile up, Step level road is on the right. You make a right hand turn, and it takes you right to the park. If you miss that turn, the next one there's a covered bridge. If you go through the covered bridge, it's going to take you to the same place.
You can't go through the covered bridge. If you go down 322, there's a big substation right there at the foot. There's a big substation right there at the foot of Sculp level. And if you've gone as far as the bridge over the Brandywine, you want to turn around and come back. Otherwise, you have to go all the way to Boot Road
And come.
around. That's a long ways.
That is. But anyway, that's again, we'll be starting at dusk, and we have 5 or 6 volunteers from the club so far that'll be there. It was a pretty good outing last year, and we had about 50 people from the community show up, and I think we're expecting at least that many this year. So that's the 22nd. So next week, or I'm sorry, this Friday, Brandywine Red Clay, next Friday at Sculp Level Road for the Star Farm Park. The next event after that, we're back to Brandywine Red Clay, October the 6th, and we're going to have a brand new Girl Scout troop there coming out for that event. And we're winding down for the year. I don't know if there's any more. Here we go, Star Farm Park, the 22nd, Sculp Level Road, good observing site. The York County Star Party starts tomorrow, Susquehannock State Park, out near the Susquehanna River. There's quite a few members of our group who are going to be showing up there, and I don't know how many people. What do you think? 100?
No, I don't think we'll quite get 100. We used to get like 200-300, but it's kind of been down for the last couple of years, trying to build it back up again. This was originally known as the Mason-Dixon Star Party many years ago. Just about going back 30 years. The Mason-Dixon Star Party is now the York County Star Party. But the ironic thing is that it's actually being held in Lancaster County. We have been searching for many years to find a good spot to hold this event, because for years we used to hold it at an old airport in York County, but the owner of the airport died, and so that kind of left us looking for a new venue. We've been searching around for quite a while, and this is a beautiful park. We're actually set up on a ball field there, just short ways away. You just go with a big overlooking the Susquehanna River and Peach Bottom, but you can ignore that. There's no glow at nighttime, so as we always kid about. But it is nice observing out there, due to the fact that it's mostly Amish tobacco farms around. There's not any lighting. So that's a rundown on the York County Star Party.
How many people are coming?
Is it?
And the girls?
Their whole family.
okay, I didn't know Spencer and Laura were.
Yeah, Spencer, Laura.
May have been the initial, and I'm guessing, I haven't seen these slides. So like I said, we're celebrating our 30th anniversary as a club. And these slides going forward, I believe, were related from back at the beginning, 30 years ago. I'm trying to read this thing here. It's not a whole lot easier to read it on the wall there. Let me see, go forward. Okay.
But that scrubber.
Just push
Although
it,
No, okay.
the members.
Well, unfortunately, I do not go back to those years. I was actually, I do the fact that I was in astronomy. I was in an astronomy club, but I was not, happened to be in this astronomy club at the time. But, Ed, this fellow right here, Ed, he happened to be the founder of the club. I've met him, he used to come up to the, Cherry Springs Star Party and the Black Forest Star Party. Matter of fact, he and I used to do the whole circuit of all the different star parties. So I've known him for a long, long time. Unfortunately, he's not in as good as health as we'd like him to, like to be. He was going to try and make it, but I see he didn't. All right, let's go on. Okay, well, you get an idea here by the date on the daily local news. Talking the time to catch swing stars. Let's see now. Okay. This was.
Here.
Oh, Pete LaFrance. Yeah, he's a long time member. He's actually, Pete LaFrance has written a couple books. And he was a member of our club.
That was right here at one of the university fields.
Yeah,
Westchester University.
yeah, it's on the university field. We've had some star events right here on the campus. Sky's the limit. Yeah. This I believe is actually up at Cherry Springs. Oh, okay. Oh, Peace Valley Nature Center. But that's was a store party there. But that's what year was that? I don't think the year on that one. Okay, here's Ed again in his little observatory shed and everything else. Interestingly enough, this telescope up here is his original telescope that he made himself. He still has that to this day. It's his favorite telescope. It was rather interesting scope in itself. It was a very unconventional setup he had on that. All right. I recognize some people, but I don't remember names. This. I'm trying to think where that's on Mount Cuba or not. Whoops. All right. Which way do we rotate that? Do we have a button there to rotate it? Well, let's see where's the button rotating. Hey, Pete, what was the scope that was on the Mount Cuba one? What is that scope? Well, they have, I'm not sure what scopes they have. I know one of them was a DuPont scope. The refractor.
Yeah.
What, a 10-inch refractor. It's a good size refractor down there at Mount Cuba. It was originally DuPont. See, Mount Cuba.
I'm not sure.
Originally built by one of the DuPonts for observing.
Yep.
And it's later been turned over. Well, it's all a conservatory now. And the Delaware Valley, not Delaware Valley, where
Delaware Astronomical.
Delaware Astronomical Society are the ones that, operate. Oh, okay, you know about that.
Yeah, I've been down there a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I've only been down there a couple times, so. It's a 10-inch, isn't it? The DuPont?
I haven't been, I have to admit, I don't know where, I just.
Yeah. I know they got a big Smith. And they.
Pull the whole thing out.
And then the DuPont scoop.
I want to see if there's a, machine, what's the, that we can blow it up with. Yeah?
That again,
Yeah. Well, there again, Ed.
I might have to get that one that we.
Are those the other Zoom people?
Pardon? That's the Zoom, that's people online to move their lines.
No.
how do you do that?
Thank you.
What's that? How do you do that?
Okay. Here's the future. Okay. This is now, like I said, Ed had a unique telescope that he built, and so on. Many years back, before the advent of the computerized telescopes, everybody's got to have computerized telescopes, but years back, the big thing was building your own telescopes. I used to do it myself and so on, grinding your mirrors, adding around his own mirrors and everything else. Okay, this article has Kathy on it, one of our members, present members.
University of Pennsylvania,
What's in that? I can't identify.
flower and
Because it says Frank's, this must not be too old.
Says it's
This is how it will smell.
1998.
Pardon? Yeah. Well, for me, that's not too long.
That's $30 ever, right?
All right, there's Black Forest Star Party.
Yes,
Star Party.
I don't. I don't see.
He's a
That Zoom screen. If you have it.
past member.
Yeah.
And,
Sorry.
These were the days,
Minimize this.
this is actually the days when
You mind if I just minimize this real quick?
I'm gonna blow it up in here.
Glad somebody knows something about this. I used to sit behind a computer all my life and so on, but now I retired. I don't even own a computer. Got a tablet.
Should be back. Isn't that what you were on? No, it's not what you were on. Oh, is that one? Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Appreciate it.
You need to stay close.
Yes. Yes, yeah. That's what I say. You set me in front of a computer nowadays is like, okay. Here we go. All right, well, this is again observing with a job where you have to climb up a ladder. Now, I never got into that because I somehow felt that ladders and darkness don't seem to mix. All my scopes are low.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's not, let's just go through them. So. Want to go back to that one? It's like not worth it.
Okay. That's a Cook Observatory.
I think that's where the telescope went.
That's a Cook
All
Observatory
right,
there.
that'll just, you know, it's upside down, this one.
Well, there again, there's Ed, and that's his unique homemade telescope there.
Is America's Funniest Video still on?
Yeah. That's, we're talking about the York. Yeah. If I knew how to switch it, I would, but I'm sure there's a way to turn that around.
Yeah, it's, I'm not sure what Windows, I have a Mac.
Okay, I'm
Guys,
not sure who. That's 2003. Okay.
I think the point was this club's been around for a long time.
Yeah, it's been here for a while.
Yeah.
Oh, this is John Heffler. He's our newsletter editor. He's been doing this for a long time. He's gotten an award from the Astronomical League for his work with newsletters. Okay, well, the picture we're showing right now, this is the Ed scope. This one right here, this is a big job that Ed got, let's say in his last active years with the club. We still have the club have that scope around somewhere. Ed couldn't, huh?
It's in Don's garage.
Yeah, I think it's in Don's garage. He's been looking for a home for it. Because Ed, he's in a nursing home right now, so he couldn't take that with him. All right, not showing that one.
This is the annual classes. Astronomy classes that
Yeah, we're looking up, yeah, another article from the oh, that's Philadelphia Inquirer. Oops, I guess that's it. Oh, wait a minute, what was that?
You know, that was the last one.
Okay, there was like, all right. I guess that kind of wraps it up. Hope I didn't go up your time too.
No, I'm good. What's your next?
Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, Bruce Ruggieri, I'm the program chair for the society. And before I introduce our speaker tonight, just want to mention you'll be seeing listings in Observations, our periodical, and I'll be also sending out email announcements. We have a full roster of speakers, again, pretty diverse group of speakers, local as well as from JPL, NASA, actually European Space Agency as well, that'll be talking over the next several months. So stay tuned. And I also want to mention, this year was the first year that we had established a scholarship from the Society for 2 Westchester University students. So the idea we came up with the end of last year. And we were able to raise a little over $3,000. And we gave 2 $1,500 scholarships to Marissa Maurer and Finn Schmidhuber this past summer. I think John Helper featured little bios about both of them in Observations. So I'm saying this was a really, I think, a successful thing. Given our history with Westchester University, we really wanted to find a way to solidify ties and also leave something to the future generation of hopeful astronomers and planetary scientists. So we want to continue this scholarship program. So I'm going to be sending an announcement out to all members or anybody who's on the email listing, basically asking for money. This is not club membership dues. Again, it's donation, free will donation to support the scholarship fund. 2 $1,500 ones this past year. We'd like to at least match that going forward. I think this is just a really important thing for the club. And having said that, it's a pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. He's no stranger to people who've been in the society for a while, John Conrad. He's both a member and a NASA Solar System ambassador. He has spoken on many different topics in the past, both for our club and others, as well as the Planetary Society. He's pretty widely known. He's almost got a fan club, I think, at this point. So, but today, John's going to talk about a subject that's very timely, and that's the OSIRIS-REx mission, the United States' first asteroid sample return mission. And as you'll see, this mission has a lot of significance from a number of standpoints, not only because this is a near-Earth asteroid, but because of the composition of this asteroid and its extreme age. So it is hope that it will be foretelling, quite a bit of information in the coming years. And the reason why we timed this talk for now is because the sample return mission is scheduled to come back and delivered to Utah on September 24th. So it seemed very timely to have John talk about the mission. So without further ado, John, welcome you. He's going to speak about the OSIRIS-REx
Please don't be bashful. I just discovered the snacks there. So if you want, feel free to go ahead and partake while I'm talking. I'm going to try something dangerous here first and see if I can unplug a USB drive without losing my slides. If I do lose them, I'll just have to, hopefully they're still there. So for my first, no, let's see. Let's see if this is working. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Pete. All right, and so hello to everybody, and hello out there on Zoom. I hope we had a bunch of people out there as well. And I have to say, I'm just delighted to be back. I have given a number of talks, but I haven't been here physically since 2019. So in the meantime, I went to Radnor for an astronomy club talk, slipped at the bottom of the hill on the way to the car and broke my ankle, and got locked down 1 month before the COVID lockdown started. So it's been kind of an adventure for the last few years. At any rate, I'm delighted to be back and see all you folks in person. There are quite a few new people now. What we're looking at here is representative of NASA's latest, greatest spacecraft, in my view. And some of my thunder was already stolen by Bruce as the date of arrival of the capsule. So if you're out in the Utah area, you want to duck a week from Sunday. Seriously, it's going to be coming out there on a week from Sunday, and these orbital mechanics things are very predictable. So that's going to happen. So along the bottom here are some folks I want to give credit to, especially the three on the left, NASA, and NASA in the person of Goddard Space Flight Center down in the DC area. And so Jason Dworkin gave an absolutely outstanding talk to us ambassadors only 6 months ago. So a lot of the slide material is from him, and it was one of the better talks I've heard one of the NASA scientists give. To the left in the bottom there, you see the University of Arizona. They are very active in sample, asteroid sample, comet sample, that sort of astronomical material research. And they work closely with the Japanese Space Agency, which you'll hear a lot about also, because the Japanese have gone to 2 asteroids, as you'll see in a minute, and sampled them. And so it's kind of a 3-way team at the moment that have been cooperating for the last 15 years. NASA, the Japanese Space Agency, and the University of Arizona. And finally, one of my alma maters, Lockheed Martin, is there. They build spacecraft. They build a lot of them. They built now 3 sample return spacecraft, and not too surprising, all of the sample canisters have come back to Utah, and it's one of those wonderful things where you get to lower risk by having a legacy design to use. So Lockheed Martin built the spacecraft OSIRIS-REx. So what in the world is that name? OSIRIS, as you're aware, perhaps, at least I am a little bit from my Egyptian history, in the 4th grade or something, was from Egyptian mythology. And it turns out that so is Bennett. So I think somebody made the connection there. But the fact is that the name of the spacecraft is one of those rare things that is really enjoyed by all program managers which is that day when you get to figure out the name for your program. And usually you do it by coming up with some kind of memorable word. And in this case, they did a really good job of coming up with a description of the mission. So right off the bat, it's all about origins of the solar system, because they're preserved best out in space where they haven't changed literally in 4.5 billion years. And so we're going to get some of that. The next two, SI and RI, those are all about the instrumentation on board and what the spacecraft does in order to understand the composition of the asteroid material. S for security, you'll understand when we get to it. Security as in one of NASA's primary missions, thank goodness, is planetary defense, with our very own planetary defense officer these days, which many nations have now, because the most credible, really bad threat is coming from space, and there are several of them, are from near-Earth objects. And so this is all about things that we've been able to learn in this part of near-Earth space from the Bennu orbiting activities. And finally, REX, Regolith Explorer. Regolith's just a fancy name for the surface. Earth has a regolith. You go out in your yard and mow it. You go to the moon, you kick the rocks around. So we were able to sample and therefore explore the Bennu surface, the asteroid surface, and so Regolith Explorer. This is a slide that he provided that is a bit too busy, so I'll just tell you what it says. Basically, it's saying that the Earth is a particular place because of our atmosphere, where there's been a lot that's happened in the 4.5 plus billion years since we were born. And what's happened is not only has stuff arrived continually that's brought water to us and organics probably at times, but we don't have any record of the original material because the way plate tectonics and the rest of our geology and weathering work, everything's been turned over again and again. So as it says, no matter what you want to know, you can't find it out without going way down, which we're not able to do. And even at that, it wouldn't be quite the same. So things have been destroyed by the geologic process. We need to get some pristine early solar system material, and we'd like to get kind that isn't contaminated, and that's a challenge. So on the left here, folks that love to go out and find meteorites, these kinds of guys, they're in clubs. Maybe there are girls that do it too. At any rate, I'm sure there are thousands around the world that love to go out and find meteorites. And the fact is, it's a wonderful thing, and they have great collections and meetings about them, but they do not keep things in a lab-controlled clean room environment by any means. So we go to the next group, and the next group here happens to be a university team from an African university that went to a particular meteorite, brought it back to a controlled environment in their lab, and that was pretty good in terms of contamination. But the best we find on Earth, you're probably aware, is down in Antarctica, where we have millions of square miles. Most of it's a nice white or gray background. And so black things not only show up well when they land there, meteorites, but there's almost never anybody there to pick them up or even notice them. So it's a great place for people to go and have a controlled place to find them and to control them. So that's the best we do on Earth. But what we really want to do is what OSIRIS-REx is doing here, which is go to another body that's still pristine from the earliest time and bring some of that back. So it's not the first of the solar system sample returns. You're well aware of the Apollo missions. So in the late 60s, early 70s, 12-man and 2-man teams on 6 missions brought back about 900 pounds of lunar regolith. And one of the things that's quite interesting is some of that still has not been taken out of storage since it arrived back, because what you want to do is save it if you have enough to save, and they had 900 of it. So even though a lot of it has been tested and researched a lot, there's a lot left because every generation has better labs, better techniques, better understanding, and so on. And so we had the Apollo bring back, we had the Soviet lunas, which actually worked in the first couple of decades of the space age. As a matter of fact, they were frequently ahead of us. And so even though they managed to crash land a couple of weeks ago, the lunas in the 70s there did bring back lunar samples for them. The Chinese have had a set of Chang'e missions where Chang'e is the Chinese name for the moon goddess, I believe. And so Chang'e 4 is famous. It's the one that landed on the far side of the moon, the only lander on the far side so far. And Chang'e 5 more recently in 2020 brought back a sample for the Japanese. And if all goes well, Artemis will actually carry astronauts to the moon within 2 or 3 years, I'd say, maybe. It was going to be 24. It's now said to be late 25. It's probably not going to happen in late 25, 26, I would guess. And the Chinese are coming fast. They're targeting 2030 for theirs. So we have ourselves a little space race going on here like we did back in the 60s. And so the next two, the solar wind, NASA Genesis, and the comet tail. So the solar wind, of course, is nothing more than that massive material called plasma. And we don't think of it as mass, but CME, coronal mass ejection, is literally tons of material that's exploded off the surface of the sun out into space. And in the case of Genesis, we went and brought a sample of that back. And NASA Stardust is actually a spacecraft very similar to what Lockheed Martin built for OSIRIS-REx. Yes, sir.
No one in Zoom can see your slides. We have to share screen.
Okay.
Did you do that earlier?
I didn't do anything now.
You have to go to Zoom. Well, I just got you home and no one can see it. Okay. Want to share screen? On your slide you're in the middle of?
Is that it? Folks at home? Somebody nod yes.
It's coming up. Now you got.
I'm watching them. There we go. Thank you very much, sir. Sorry about that. Thanks, Don. Yep.
On YouTube.
Okay. All right. So we're back. So we've got this legacy of design for the SRC, the sample return canister. So it's been time tested, actually used for a sample from a comet tail by the same, very similar Lockheed Martin spacecraft. And then, as I mentioned before, the Japanese Space Agency has had a couple visits, one to a stony, one to a carbon-based asteroid, Hayabusa and Hayabusa 2. And the latter category is the same kind that we've decided to go to by going to Bennu. I want to get out of this. Hey, just give me a second here. There we go. I wanted to hide the presenter view. That gets to be quite a nuisance. Now I've got to share the correct screen. Let's see how we're doing. Are we there? Okay. Go away.
I can get you back. It is not intuitive. Put it over there.
Thank you very much. We still got the thing in the center. Let me see if I can just move it. No, right there, there we go. There we go. Closes. All right. So also coming up are visits to the Martian system, first to the largest of their moons, Phobos, and that's the Japanese again. They say between now and the year 2028, so we'll see how that goes. And we have our own Mars sample return mission that's not just on the books, it's approved. The design isn't done, and a lot of the hard choices haven't been made. But what has in fact happened is shown over there in that little picture that's cockeyed. That looks like a lightsaber on the ground. That's one of the sample canisters that Perseverance carried with it on Mars 2020. It's now been driving around within kilometers of the original landing area, and it's been sampling things. It has 38 of those canisters. It's filled, I believe, 22 of them now, and it's dropped about a dozen of them off in a place called the depot. And the depot isn't where they're actually going to bring it back from, probably. That's the backup site. The Mars, the return spacecraft is supposed to land and rendezvous with Perseverance when it gets there, and then lift off after getting Perseverance set of tubes and go back up in the Martian orbit, rendezvous there and dock with a European Space Agency spacecraft, and that one will bring the samples home. So the money's there, the work is underway, the details haven't all been ironed out. It's all supposed to happen within the next 9 years, so that'll be pretty exciting if we get all those samples back from Mars. All right. When you use somebody else's computer that you've never seen before, come early. Not sure why I can't get the, yeah, it's, I can do that, but I wanted to get this thing going. It won't work. At least I think I can do it. No, it doesn't even seem to want to do that. Huh. Not sure what this means up here. My problem, folks, is I can't get any of the slides to move with any key.
You take your credit card.
Let me see. So let's hold on. Let's just stop sharing for a moment. Get us back to square one. So we've got our, all right, our PowerPoint slideshow is here.
Let me try it with the,
Just make sure, does it work if I just have it here?
nope.
So that's not connecting. Right, isn't it? I just saw the green, does the green light have to be on for that to work?
It's been on. See, none of these.
Oh yeah, those don't work either.
Yeah.
That's strange, for sure. All right. Which slide are we on? This one.
There we go.
Let's try. So this is the view that was working for you, right?
Yeah, except I always get out of the presenter again.
Okay, so let me minimize that for a moment. Go back to Zoom, share your screen. This screen. Let's share the PowerPoint and see if that works better.
Let me just try something while you're there.
Yep.
Nope, it's not working.
So if I try to go to the slideshow from here. Wow, where is my slideshow?
We can see it on Zoom now.
Oh, now we can't see it here. Thank you, though. That's.
Try another slide. Just go
Oh,
down
wait,
here.
hold on.
and open one of those. Go down and open
Resume
the slide.
slideshow. Oh, here it is. All right, and you want it as the,
Okay, so that's working in this. Here's what I do. Just
yeah, do whatever you normally do.
maybe it was here.
Made to tap it again.
Hide presenter,
That's okay.
which I did before. So let's see if it works this
And
time.
let me just get rid of these guys out of your way.
Yeah, it's working. Okay.
Okay, try again. Make sure it works again before I sit down.
Okay, here we go.
If you click it, does it work?
No, it doesn't.
Because now it thinks we're in Zoom. To get rid of the Zoom controls, it then focuses on Zoom. So how can I? Let's go back to where I was. All right. Sorry, turning this off one more time and restarting it because we seem to have better luck. All right, there's your PowerPoint.
You know, we're just gonna leave it when we get to the presenter view this time because
Sounds good.
twice when I've gone away from that, it's locked.
That's when it's caused the problems. My goodness, I can't even get out of this now. Why? Okay. Let me stop sorry, guys. All right, so now we're back to clean. Let's go to Zoom. Let's share. Let's share this. Now let's go back here and go from the current slideshow. And maybe.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, it's working.
Okay, is that good enough to
Yeah,
get you through? All right.
sorry about that. All right, so we're gonna take about a couple minutes here to review the state of asteroids. Because we've talked about this a lot before. You know what you're looking at top down on the solar system. You're looking at 1.3 million roughly small solar system objects, i.e. asteroids. And what you're looking at, whether they're coded green or red or blue, are all, this isn't some artist concept. This is actually the data that the International Astronomical Union Minor Planet Center keeps on each and every one of these dots that we have discovered, tracked, and have a solid orbit, orbital solution for that we revisit from time to time. And so most of these are out there in what we all grew up knowing as the asteroid belt, the main belt between Mars and Jupiter. And the red ones are the ones that have somehow come inside of Mars orbit and in many cases cross Earth's orbit. Those are the near Earth objects, which we are counting and putting into the catalog to the tune of over 3,000 a year right now. So there are over 30,000 of those, and those are the ones that we care most about for planetary defense. And so, and finally, the blue ones you see out there, a couple of clouds before and after Jupiter, in the orbit of Jupiter, are the Trojans. And basically, they're at the stable gravity points, the Lagrange points in that particular two-body system. And so what we're going to talk about briefly then is why did we get to Bennu when we have 1.3 million candidates? Well, right off the bat, we didn't actually want to go out to the main belt if we could afford it. And we only have a limited budget. And so we want to go to near Earth space. And we want to go to near Earth space with favorable inclinations. And that narrowed it down to about 192 of the NEOs, the near Earth asteroids. And so from those, we decided that based on what we have observed in the spin rates and the gravity, if you will, of these tiny objects, we wanted to get to something that was bigger than 200 meters. And there are only about 26 of those that are in those attainable locations for a trajectory for OSIRIS-REx. So we had the count down to 26. We went through them. we understood from spectral data a lot about them, and we chose one of the carbon-rich ones. There were 5 of them out of the 26, and the one we chose, not surprisingly, when you understand a little of the backstory, was Bennu. It turns out that Bennu isn't just one of the favorable orbits and carbon-based, but it's the most, if you will, potentially hazardous asteroid at the moment. The folks at the Center for Near-Earth Objects in NASA out in JPL keep lists of everything. They have marvelous websites if you ever want to go out and look at all the impacts that we watch for all the time and what the latest hit list, if you will, is. But the very highest risk rating on the Palermo scale, which you can read about and see how that's set up, is for the asteroid Bennu right now, with a little bit better than a 1 in 2,000 chance that when it approaches Earth late in the next century, it might impact us. Okay. And at its size, which is about 500 meters across, that's much bigger than Tunguska. Let's see, the one over central Russia was Chelyabinsk. That was 10 years ago. The one that you can go see out in Arizona, Meteor Crater, those were about 40 or 50 meters. This is 10 times that big, much more massive, much more dangerous. At any rate, Bennu's at the top of the list, and so it's nice that we get to go out there and take a look at it up close. So here you're going to get to physically see these targets. Here are the 2 targets that were visited by the Japanese. You see the dates in red there. The sample was taken on that one that looks like a sea otter there on the left, Itokawa, in 2005 and returned in 2010. And we thought we learned some good things from observing that. But one of the things that they saw was lots and lots of very nice, smooth, open areas to go sample. And it turned out that when we looked at larger asteroids, and in particular Ryugu, which is very similar to Bennu, there are lots and lots of huge boulders, and there are very few areas of lots of smooth area to give you a high probability of not bumping into the wrong thing when you take your sample. So at any rate, they had to change their strategy for how we look for the landing site for Bennu, as you'll see in a few minutes. But these are the 2 visited. One of them was 0.5 kilometer in diameter. That's the little one, much narrower than 0.5 kilometer. And the other one's a big one. It's 1 kilometer. There aren't that many asteroids that we're tracking like that. So Ryugu is a very big one. And it's also carbonaceous. And so very similar to the one that we chose at about half the diameter, Bennu. And I thought you'd be interested, since we talked last September about the impact that NASA had last year with the DART spacecraft. Here's a picture of what you may remember, Dimorphos is the name of it. And that's its size relative to the Colosseum. And last September, we very successfully ran into it. You probably all remember that. And we learned quite a bit about just how solid the surfaces on these are not. And you're going to hear a lot about that with Bennu based on what we've already learned. So now let's look at the spacecraft for just a minute. It's a fairly simple spacecraft. In the upper left there, that's the spacecraft with everything tucked in. The solar panels are not deployed out to the side as they are in the other 2 views. And the sampler arm on the left is tucked in. And when the sampler arm is extended, as it is over there on the right, it has a foot, which is actually the sample canister where the sample is taken. The spacecraft itself is filled with instruments. I don't know, there are 10 or 11 instruments, I think. Of course, there are imagers. And so we got lots of high resolution imagery of this little body, which we orbited and imaged for over 2 years. And so lots and lots of understanding of it. In addition, there were a whole family of spectrometers for composition information on board, not just in the visible IR and thermal bands, but also an X-ray spectrometer. So we were able to understand a lot about the surface. And there was a laser altimeter, which you've heard about in some of our other talks about, the Earth's sea level and so on. They're very handy to do a 100% coverage of the entire body and a perfect understanding of how long it takes your electromagnetic signal to go down to the surface, come back, and therefore what is the height there, and eventually what is the shape and size of every rock and every crater and so on. So over that period of time, they built these 3D maps. They built compositional maps, and they spent a fair amount of time selecting first 4 candidate sites and then choosing which one they were going to go down to. And you'll see in a minute how that turned out. So reconnaissance was a primary mission, but so was science. But for the reconnaissance, we had to get the sample, or we had to then pick a site and go get the sample. And so here's a look at that sample head. Now, for most of the men, at least my age or middle-aged, this is a car's air filter, essentially. It looks like we have here on the end of the arm. And it turns out it's about that size, too. It's about 10 to 12 inches across. That's the sample head. It blows out a bunch of compressed nitrogen, you see there, which kicks up the material on the surface. And the sampling is done as it comes up underneath in the middle there and into the outside of the middle. And then it's closed off, and you'll get a chance to actually see the real one. So this was actually a 0G test of this. I'm not sure how they did that, if they took it up on the, I can't remember the real name, the Vomit Comet, the 0G aircraft. But at any rate, they actually tested the technique that way. And the way it's supposed to work is it'll touch down on this crust that we expected this body to have, and it will push with a spring that's in the arm, and 2 things hopefully will happen. Either you will feel the resistance of the surface, which is one signal to stop, or else the spring in the arm will compress, and that will be the secondary signal. And you'll see how that went in a minute. But this was the test of it. So now we're going to see what things happened when we went actually out there. So in 2016, on the green ring there, which is the Earth's orbit, we see the launch. And so we went around the sun for quite a while, past Earth again, and finally 2 years later arrived at Bennu in 2018. Spent a lot of time in a dance of orbits that you'll see in a second, and chose finally the Nightingale crater for the sample site. We did a couple of rehearsals in 2020, and we then, after the final rehearsal, did the actual sampling on October 20th. So what is that? Coming up on 3 years ago. Note that it was on the other side from the sun from us. So with 8 minutes of light time from the sun, it's more than twice the time. So it takes 18 minutes to get a signal across that space. So you now can understand that Bennu had to be outfitted for autonomous operations, which is what it was. And they had their fair share of waiting for, half an hour or more to see if something actually got there and happened the way it was supposed to. But at any rate, it's operated perfectly. And so here is a computer simulation. That dot there is Bennu, of the approach initially in 2018. And then it did this really incredible dance with the objective to see all orientations of all sides of Bennu in all lighting and best understand the surface, and then going close with these orange orbits. I think the lowest of these was, unless I'm wrong, I think 0.22 kilometers. That's 220 meters. The radius of Bennu is only 250 meters. So it may sound like, a lot of the time was spent at 620 meters out, which is more than the diameter. Well, the Earth's 8,000 miles wide. If you go out to more than the diameter, that's quite a ways out. The low Earth orbiters on Earth are like 100 to 200 miles sometimes. That's like 1/20th to 1/40th of the radius. If we went to 1/20th or 1/40th of the radius, it's 250 meters. We're talking about something that's 2, 3, 4 stories above the surface as it goes around. So they didn't get quite that close, but they got almost that close. You have to kind of recalibrate when you think of an orbit around an object this small. And it set the world record for orbiting the smallest body yet in the solar system. So I'm going to go back and do that because I know you had to listen to me talk too much. But I want you to see that after they had gotten information about all sides, they went into the inner orbits and spent a long time in each of them. And these are, literally thousands of times a year they were orbiting. And then finally, after they selected the launch site in early 2020, then they got down to having a rehearsal, which you'll see in just a second. And so the spacecraft came in, went down to the surface, and did everything but take a sample, just like the Apollo astronauts did before Apollo 11. And then the real thing happened, and they put their foot down and got their sample, spent about 4 or 5 months looking at the area that they'd sampled and fired the retro rockets on, which is very useful. You'll see some of that in a minute too. So that was the extent of the sampling operation. And then it headed back in early 21. So it's 2.5 years later, and a lot has happened in that time. But remember, it had all those instruments taking all that data very up close. So in the meantime, they have done a lot of research, a lot of science with the material that they got. And one of the more interesting discoveries was something called particle ejections from the surface. They'd never seen this before, but they saw it over and over again. These were spontaneous ejections of small rocks and material off the surface into space with various levels of energy from a particular site. There was no reason that they knew for it. And as you can see by those orbits, some of the orbits, some of the particles had enough energy to achieve escape velocity, which is very, very small for an object this size. Some of them didn't achieve escape velocity, and so they acted like ballistic missiles, like rocks that you threw across the surface and came crashing down and caused more particles to be exploded off the surface. So they saw it like every few weeks for a number of months, and whether it's true or not, you can extrapolate that to all the other bodies that are out there and wonder just how many of these small particle explosions off the surface there are that are going on. One thing I guess I did want to note, let's see if it's, yeah, there we have it. They learned a lot from looking at the areas where the particles had come from about voids. They were able to understand the density better, but perhaps most important, they calculated an 8 microgravity environment. So that's almost weightless. The International Space Station is 5. So it's essentially the same level of no gravity being on the surface. So if you're standing on Bennu, it's big, much bigger than a whole bunch of stadiums. You could jump in the air probably and leave. And you have to, as a matter of fact, I forget which one it was. Arthur C. Clarke wrote one of his books where they were nervous about actually walking across this small asteroid that they might float off into space. Very possible. So here's a look that we got from the spectrometers at the composition of the surface material that's coded there. As you can see, there weren't any big surprises in terms of what kind of material we found, because we looked before, and there's lots of history of water in the rocks and minerals. There's traces of organics, so that wasn't a surprise. What was a surprise was these pyroxene xenoliths on the right. And those particular ones were able, and I don't understand how, to be identified as not having come from Bennu. So whether they came from something big like Vesta or something more nearby, who knows? But they're out there trading material all the time. One of the interesting things in the questions and answers that Jason Dworkin told us was that in the interim, while they've been waiting for the canister to come back, they got interested enough in that they now have this picture of Bennu with many particles around it being generated all the time. And they went to the southern hemisphere for a couple of years to look to see if they could detect in any way a meteor shower from these things. And so they've looked for that. They haven't found it yet, but everybody's quite interested in this new phenomenon of particles jumping off the surface. So finally, we get to the security part of OSIRIS. And what you're seeing here is the Earth and Bennu come together right there. And if you look in the lower left, that's September of 2135. That's when we have the expected next close approach. It's not the closest approach. The closest approach is in that window starting in 2179. But what they're hoping is that we will either have enough impact from Earth gravity or have understood enough about asteroid deflection then that we'll be able to take the new orbit that Bennu will be in if it changes and be able to handle that if one of those dates where it has about a 1 in 2,000 chance cumulatively of hitting us, if we find out one of them actually is calculated to be real, then we'll be able to think about doing something about it. And given what DART just accomplished, we're starting to learn things that we can do. And so finally, another piece of science, this just showed up in the local news. I think it was in the Inquirer that I saw this a couple of weeks ago. At any rate, some of the researchers have now put an article into the planetary science journal Icarus, and it's all about layering in small asteroids. And what they've used as the basis for that is a comparison between small craters and large craters. And again, they've spent years looking at the surface. And if you look at the Nightingale crater there, which is about maybe 25, a little bit less meters across, where the sample site was, you can see that it's quite smooth. And what they found was all over the body, anything less than about 25 meters turns out to have a much smoother wall on it than the larger craters, which look a lot like the rocks and material that's on the rest of the surface. And so out of this, they've come up with a finding that we don't have a homogeneous rubble pile. We've got a layer just below the surface that may be as much as 3 or 4 meters thick, which on a body that's only 500 meters across is pretty thick, of compacted small particles. And so hopefully, since we've sampled that particular area on the small crater, we'll get a chance to learn something that may or may not support or refute that latest hypothesis. All right, so again, the actual mission took place with arrival of the spacecraft, mapping in order to do reconnaissance, in order to do site surveys, in order to do a target site selection, rehearse how we were going to go down to the surface. And then on the 20th of October, they did the sampling. And so here it is. These are actual images. The two on the outside are the live camera feeds. On the left is the sampling arm looking straight down on the canister. And on the right is an off-axis look where you'll see the shadow of the arm come down as it approaches the surface. And then you'll see what happens when it touches down. And in the middle is the orientation of the two views. So here comes the shadow now. We're approaching the surface with the foot. And it's going to just push and then explode some, but instead it just blew everything up. It was like an explosion on the surface. You'll see a simulation of this in a minute in a video. But these are the actual images as it backed away when the retro rockets fired. You can see there on the left, the dark material viewed at an angle is actually a ring around the place where they sampled where material has fallen back. It created a real ring of material. And you'll get an even better look at that. So here is a really outstanding video that the Goddard people put together. And if this goes well, I'll be able to pick the right place. So okay. Well, let me just, first of all, apologize for the technical difficulty. First of all, I was only going to show you the last half of that. It's a little too long. But at any rate, I thought it was just an outstanding way to see what actually happened. And maybe the biggest point is the ball pit and the bowl of popcorn. And when we hit DART, which is about a third of the diameter of this a year ago, the amount of material that was pushed away is much greater than had been expected. So what we've found, and we now have 2 samples of it, is a quite different surface layer on these asteroids than we'd expected. There's no cohesion. There isn't anything approaching what you could call a crust. And so it's all about learning, and it's all about learning what the targets are that we might have to think about impacting someday to keep something from hitting us. So it's really, really important science that we're getting here. The other thing from that, I don't know if anybody else noted it, but I've seen this 10 or 20 times. He said that as they came down, the sampling line approached with the speed of an insect walking. And what he said was 2 centimeters per second. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not want any insects that can go 4 inches a second coming towards me. So maybe it was 1 centimeter a second or something like that. At any rate, not a great analogy. All right, so now we're looking at the sample canister, and it's not really a continuous video. It's just 3 images shown in sequence over and over again in a loop. And it's making the point that as the material tried to get in underneath the inner ring to the inside and be captured with a mylar flap that's supposed to close, the mylar flap couldn't close. There's a thing that looks like a black football on the left there, sort of a ellipse. And that's actually a lock that's stuck in there holding the flap open. And so they fussed about this for the first day. I remember it in the news, but they were able to confirm that they got not just what was hoped for as about 50 or 60 grams, but they probably got about 4 times that much to bring home. We won't know until it comes home, and they had a maneuver where they were going to stick the arm out straight and then spin, and therefore be able to calculate exactly what the additional mass was. They decided they wouldn't do that because they didn't want to lose anything. But now you're going to get to see the arm or the canister just before they cut the arm off here. as it snaps into place and locks down, you can see particles floating off of it there. And so that's agony for the scientists that want every particle to come home. But at any rate, it all worked very well. They cut the iron, pulled it back, and they closed the canister and headed back. And so here comes the return now. 2.3 years later, it's about to get here in 12 days. And when it reaches nearby 4 hours before atmospheric entry, it just deploys this canister. And of course, it comes through the atmosphere, heats up, and deploys, as often these things are done, first a drogue and then a main chute, and comes down into the Utah desert. And as I said, same kind of a return that's been done twice before for 2 other NASA missions into the Utah desert. A place called the Dugway Proving Ground that you probably heard of, selected partly because there aren't people around, but partly also because the military controls the reservation and people can't wander out there and take a look at it. And so as you see, OSIRIS-REx, the spacecraft, comes, and 4 hours before entry, it deploys that canister. And so we're going to talk about what happens to the spacecraft then, because it isn't done. So the canister comes in 4 hours later, it enters at the entry interface. It gets extremely hot, and peak heating and peak deceleration are at about the same place at about 60 kilometers up. And then it lands in what they had calculated to be this particular target ellipse, the blue ellipse there, with all of the computer runs they did in black, with the centroid being that blue dot. So we'll see how close they come to that. But at any rate, it'll get there. We have high confidence, and we'll be picking it up a week from Sunday. So let's talk about the spacecraft, because it still has, fortunately, all of its systems operating, propellant on board. And it turns out that while the spacecraft was returning, a mission extension was created and approved and funded called APEX, Apophis Explorer. And so the OSIRIS-REx spacecraft, without a sample return arm, but everything else working fine, spends the next 6 years to rendezvous with what used to be the #1 on the hit list of dangerous asteroids, Apophis, another potentially hazardous asteroid in near-Earth space. And on April 13th of 2029, fortunately, it doesn't hit Earth. If you read the articles about 20 years ago, for a while, there were articles about Apophis looking like there was some good chance, and by good chance, I mean like 2.5%. But that's so much higher than anything else we've seen that it was a real chance that it might hit Earth. It turns out after a couple of years, they'd gotten more precise, and they've confirmed that it can't hit us, but it's going to come to about the altitude of the geosynchronous ComSats. And it's going to be visible to the naked eye, MAG 3.1. So if you want to go to Europe, or I think parts of Asia, you'll be able to see it, but not from the Americas. So that may be something on your small bucket list, maybe. So OSIRIS spacecraft is going to approach a couple of weeks before then, and it'll get near enough by the 8th of April that it will start making its observations. It'll rendezvous about a week after the close approach, and it'll spend, just as it did at Bennu, lots of time doing a dance and looking at things and picking the place that it wants to do a touch and go without anything to touch with. So basically, it's going to go down to the surface at the selected site, fire the retro rockets again, just like it did at Bennu, and create quite a spread on the ground for yet another asteroid. This one's a little smaller. It's about 370 meters as opposed to 500 for Bennu, but it's still one that would be quite dangerous if it got to Earth. But at any rate, we're going to get another look at the changes in the surface that we can create by firing the retro rockets, just like we did at Bennu. So again, lots of interesting information about the kind of targets that we're most concerned about. This particular little animation, blue is the Earth's orbit, magenta is Apophis, And so I think right about there is that close approach. And what we expect is demonstrated by the fact that the major axis, the long axis of this elliptical orbit changes significantly. It actually increases 20% or so, we calculate, due to the Earth's gravity effect. So all very interesting. Back to the sample, there it is in the desert, gets picked up and taken care of for a short time at Utah, and then flown to a purpose-built clean room facility at Johnson Space Center, where it'll be received. And from there, the sample will be divided up and sent to no less than 38 different arranged projects with their own research labs, their own research equipment and techniques in several continents. The principal sites you see in red, Johnson in the center, University of Arizona on the left, and Goddard on the right. But many, many other research facilities will get part of the original sample. Now that sample is to be 25%. So that was going to be 25% of 60, about grams spread around to hold back 75%. Now it may be that they have 25% of 250 grams. So that would be much better. And it could improve, for example, a particular measurement to go from parts per billion to parts per trillion or something if you have quite a bit more of the sample. So here's kind of an illustration of what goes on in these sample labs, of which there are many you now have seen. They all have their own instrumentation and researchers and techniques which turn over on a regular basis. In the upper right there, that woman in the blue sweater, she actually wasn't born when Apollo 16 sent its samples back, but she's actually doing some work on an instrument that was designed and purchased after Apollo, long after Apollo, on a sample that came back before she was born. So it just illustrates that by holding back the sample, where we're archiving 75% of it initially, that allows you to wait until the next generation or beyond, when the techniques get really good, or to do particularly targeted research, depending on what's starting to pan out, and still have a lot of sample left. And I'm not going to dwell on it. There are a bunch of hypotheses that are going to be tested initially. First of all, comparing what we've already learned with remote sensing with what we find from the in situ data that we can get, or in situ research with the material that comes back. Second, of course, there's always a primary set of hypotheses that have to do with looking for organics or things that could support life. And that'll be happening one more time here. There are a bunch of different hypotheses that they're looking into that have to do with the history of the solar system, including not only the material that formed Bennu, which was, the solar cloud, but the extrasolar material from which that came. And I'm not sure how they do this, but that's what they're talking about. And then finally, the fact that they weren't able to close everything down as neatly as they wanted to, and also the fact that they never did expect to have much in the way of volatiles because it's not a sealed canister, but they're going to be looking at that, and they're going to be comparing it to what the Japanese got at Ryugu. The Japanese decided the opposite in terms of expenditure of their mass that they had, and they decided to have a much more elaborate canister that could be held in a vacuum so that they could bring volatiles back, which in fact they did. There was a little leakage, but they got some. And the mass expense for that meant that they didn't have as much to spend on the rest of their spacecraft. So they only brought back 6 grams as opposed to what may be 250 here. So there's a trade-off there. And it'll be interesting to see if we do learn anything about the volatiles here. And so by the end of September, they promised to have some of the initial information out within days of the sample return. And then they have a 6-month window with a whole bunch of pre-planned research topics and so on, and an issue that's planned to publish those, much like they're doing with JWST now, with the early science that's been planned for a decade in many cases and that. So they've gotten pretty good at designing instruments based on objectives and teams putting things together and planning ahead what they're going to do when they get something and then getting priority for it when it arrives. And they're doing the same thing here. So that's it. There's some websites on there if you want to, look for stuff. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Good job.
Yeah.
Anything to suggest that the core of Bennu is solid, or is it all going to be an amalgamation of each part of it?
I think we saw what it's going to be. It's the words that these guys use is it flows it's like a fluid.
They've only looked at the outer layer. They don't really.
I'm sorry, did you say core?
Core.
Okay, I beg your pardon. I missed that word. I don't know.
Yeah, it's all loose amalgamation. That would hit the Earth's atmosphere. It would just fall flat. Huh?
That's starting to be what a lot of us that actually don't they don't have access to everything would think. I mean, I think one of the things they're doing is allowing themselves to run their computer models more accurately for momentum transfer. Okay. At one point, I thought that they had learned some things about what they called the beta effect on DART. And it sounded almost like they were half expecting it to be almost like a styrofoam, which would be an energy absorber. Well, loose material is not so much an absorber as, it's a pass-through, if you will. I don't know. It's intuitively, it seems like, are we seeing things here where we're literally talking about loosely gravitationally coupled rocks with a bunch of popcorn all over the surface that when it hits us is not only going to, get through to the hard stuff more towards the middle, but not have very much of it there when you get there. I don't know. There's an effect that they have that has to do with this layering that they talked about, where they believe that there's a compact layer of small material. And the effect has got an interesting name. It's called the Brazil nut effect. Brazil nuts about the size of your thumb, the big ones. Okay. So you get your mixed nuts and you shake them, and you might think the big things will go to the bottom, but it's just the opposite. The little things, they all find spaces, and the smallest things go all the way, and the medium-sized things get below the Brazil nuts. And they think that may be what they're seeing at the surface, is that through the eons, billions of years, literally, of the various vibrations that have been caused by probably impacts many times and so on, but eventually that surface has had things sifted so that the big things are still on the surface, but a lot of the medium-sized stuff is about a layer down, for meters, not just a thin layer, but, a 10-foot, 12-foot layer. That's part of the current theory. Other questions?
John, Dave Hockenberry here.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
As somebody who was in the aerospace engineer, and you're looking at the way that these missions have approached going to asteroids, orbiting them, even landing, taking samples, does this put certain nations or companies like Lockheed ahead of the game when it comes to ultimately mining the asteroid belt, or do you think this is just all preliminary and none of what we're they're going to actually get up there in order to bring materials back for commercial purposes is going to have any application. If you don't mind commenting on what you would speculate that would be.
It's very much for the question, Dave. Thanks for putting me on the spot. Let's see, is there anybody from Lockheed Martin here? I mean, the answer obviously is just like the rest of you. I don't know. One can imagine that the US government, as opposed to other nations, and I believe this, having worked for the government for much of my career, will be much more careful. They may not do it in the smartest way, but they'll be much more careful to try to avoid those kinds of conflicts of interest. In other words, one that could have commercial value from the first people that could have the deepest understanding of where to look and where not to look. So I wouldn't be surprised if the people that get access to the geologic information first, the commercial people, would have some kind of a Chinese wall put up to being able to work with people that were looking into the actual execution of making money on that information. I don't know how much more simply to say it than that. And I don't think, for example, that the Chinese or the Russians or the Indians maybe would necessarily try to do the same thing, just because I never saw any indication competing with them in the international environment that showed that they had ethics that were forced on them. I will say that. I mean, everybody that's got the profit motive at their heart when they go into work in the morning, like most Americans and the rest of the human beings do, that want to go into business, wants to do things that give them an advantage. But we often had rules, and I can say that because GE in 85 down in Chestnut Street, some of the old timers might remember, we got debarred from doing government business for months. I had to close down a program completely, a multi-million-dollar program that I was running, because somebody had crossed the wires in terms of ethical use of the information about different kinds of contracts. And Jack Welch, none other than Jack Welch, who wished for the next 8 years until he sold us that he could have sold us immediately, because he couldn't sell light bulbs and refrigerators at the time as well, had to have his staff come up with training. So we had a year or two of training on ethics. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because U.S. industry and the U.S. government work in such a way that they are very careful about these sorts of things out in the open. I can't tell you what might go on behind the curtains, but they actually do try to do the right things, and I don't necessarily believe that other cultures do the same thing. So at some point, there's going to be, a gold rush or whatever, a rare earth or rare asteroid or whatever it is rush that's going to take place probably. And there will be some aerospace contractors that'll get first understanding of some of the geology and stuff, I think, or the composition, but I don't know if they'll be able to use it. I don't know. Did that hit your question anywhere?
Absolutely, it did. But it's interesting in that, for instance, with SpaceX and Elon Musk, he's really kind of focused on A, delivering satellites, and B, his heavy Falcon in order to be able to lift very heavy payloads into space. What's interesting about what the Japanese and now the US are kind of ahead of the game in is that we have probably between the two of us more expertise in getting out to the asteroid belt and manipulating things out there than many of the other nations and companies out there. So it's going to be really interesting to see who's going to step up and, I think, try and not necessarily cash in, but explore this area for the private industry. Thanks, John.
Let's see, Don, I don't know if are you still on, Don? Anyway, I wanted to refer to a particular streaming program. I think it was called Mars. Did any of you see Mars? There were 3 seasons. The reason I bring it up is, one of the people that introduced each of the episodes, it was very well done, very realistic about maybe 30 years from now, the first humans on Mars that find water and set up a colony and start to go through the early decades of what they're doing. One of the people that supported it was Musk, and one of the people that introduced the episodes was Musk. And it got to what you're talking about. In one of the next to the last episodes, an independent agency that was an outlaw group of entrepreneurs launched their own, set up their own Mars base, started to do things that violated all the treaties that had been set up amongst the nations. And the leader ended up dying, in a terrible accident. But it's kind of interesting that Musk underwrote that. And it highlighted some of the things that we're going to run into when we go to another planet and try to not just live there, but actually make some money there. The profit motive will always be there, universal. Any other questions?
John Stewart Levin.
Hey, Stuart, how are you?
Good. To follow up on Dave's question, what is on these asteroids that would be valuable enough to spend the cost to get a satellite to it, harvest it, and return the material?
Let's see, in 3 words, I don't know. There may be some experts on geology and, planetary geology. Are there any people here? I don't have a good answer for you, Stuart. If you want to see a story about it, again, a really good streaming series is called The Expanse. And it's about 3 races of humans, 100 or 200 years in the future. Earth humans, Martian humans, who have been born in, much lower gravity and so on, and can't come to Earth because of it. And a bunch of them that are the builders that live in the belt. And what they're doing out there for the most part is serving like slaves the old humans on Earth and Mars by mining. Okay, so there are a lot of people that expect there's a lot of valuable material out there. And this is what we're going to find in great quantities compared to what we find on Earth that turns out to make certain, manufactured materials, very viable. Who knows? I don't know. Anyway, interesting things to think about. Any other questions? Yes.
I was wondering, the main thought of literally shoot one of these things with a projectile to see how far in a projectile would go, or if in fact there's no core to it, it would sail right on through it.
Yeah. I'm sure there have been. Yeah. I mean, these missions are very, very expensive. And so that was the first. Yeah. That was the first one to be a kinetic impactor, which is what you're talking about. Yeah. It would be interesting to see, Don. I'm sure you keep an eye on these things too. What the research community comes out with in the next year or two in articles about that, about what was it called? Dimorphos. Yeah. And what we learned there. I've seen a lot of the pictures and you're not sure what you're seeing at times. I know there's a whole field of builders that now is like a family accompanying Dimorphos.
But going back to look at it.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned that. The European mission is going back in a couple of years.
I may have done that already. Yeah. Well, I don't know how much of an impact that was. It may have gone like this. That was not the answer to the question where you are going to turn it dust and get the rest.
Anybody else? Thanks very much, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.